What if your biggest regret isn't something you did, but something you didn't say? We all carry unspoken burdens, invisible threads connecting us to past choices. This video delves into the silent language of regret, exploring how these unaddressed feelings subtly sculpt your present reality and influence your inner peace. These regrets are not memories. They are echoes, a sound that keeps bouncing inside you even after the original moment has ended. You don't hear them the way you hear a voice. You hear them the way you feel a silence, a tension, a weight, a hesitation, a pattern. They show up in the way you pull back from opportunity, in the way you feel undeserving of love, in the way you explain your life to yourself at night when there's nobody to impress, not even your own ego. Unspoken regret has a particular kind of power. It shapes you quietly, because what you refuse to acknowledge shapes you the most. You can talk for years about your goals, your growth, your desire to evolve. But if the voice inside of you still believes you failed somewhere that really mattered, that belief will direct your life more than any vision board ever could. The painful irony is that the deeper your regret, the quieter it becomes. You silence it first as protection, then as habit, then as self-image. Eventually, it isn't something you hide, it's something you become. Many people think regret is a single feeling. I wish I hadn't done that. But regret is not a feeling, it's a story, a hidden narrative about who you believe you could have been, should have been, or still wish you were. When this story goes unspoken, it rots. It turns into shame, into insecurity, into the belief that the best version of you is gone, buried somewhere behind choices that can't be undone. So instead of facing it, you do what most people do. You drown the echo in noise. You stay busy. You chase distractions. You wear achievement like armor. You use confidence like a band-aid over a wound you never cleaned. You convince yourself that the version of you who failed, who stayed silent, who walked away, who chose comfort over courage, that version is gone. But the mind doesn't delete unfinished stories. It keeps them in storage until something in your present life sounds like the past. A similar person, a similar situation, a similar opportunity, a similar fear. And suddenly, the echo returns. Not to punish you, but to ask a question you never answered. Why did you abandon the part of you that wanted more? The reason unspoken regret is so heavy is because it is connected to identity. You regret what mattered to you. You don't regret things that were irrelevant. You regret the choices that touched something sacred. Your values, your dreams, your sense of worth, your belief in your own potential. It could be the relationship you didn't fight for, the dream you abandoned silently, the apology you never said, the truth you never admitted, the version of yourself you betrayed to be accepted, the chance you let slip because courage felt too expensive. These regrets haunt you not because of the event itself, but because of who you were in that moment. Deep regret is a mirror. It reflects a version of you that you never got to become. And when you ignore that reflection long enough, you start to build a life that is technically successful but emotionally hollow. You learn to perform stability instead of living authentically. You start to choose what is safe instead of what is meaningful. You avoid anything that might remind you of the moment you believed you weren't enough. But here's the paradox. The regrets you run from are often the exact doorway to becoming who you were meant to be. There is a reason the past still pulls at you. Not every memory is meant to be buried. Some are meant to be listened to, studied, understood. Regret is not the enemy. Silence is. Because in silence, regret becomes shame. In honesty, regret becomes guidance. Your unspoken regrets are not trying to hurt you. They are trying to teach you something you refused to learn when the moment was still alive. They are asking you to stop running, to stop pretending, to stop performing a version of yourself that is defined by avoidance rather than truth. Before you can transform your regret, you must first do something very simple and very difficult. Hear it. Hear the echo, not as judgment, not as punishment, but as a message from a younger version of you, a version that wanted more from life and from yourself. The chapter of regret begins not with fixing the past, but with listening to it. That is the difference between regret that destroys you and regret that frees you. Regret doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in symbols, patterns you repeat without understanding, impulses you can't justify, emotions that feel bigger than the moment that triggered them. If you expect regret to show up as a clear thought, "I regret this," you will miss it every each time. The deepest regrets are the ones that never learned how to turn themselves into language. Instead, they become behavior. The mind is always communicating. Even when you silence your thoughts, the truth still finds a way to express itself through posture, through tension, through avoidance, through the emotions you can't control, and the reactions that surprise you. You believe you've buried regret, but really you've only moved it from awareness to instinct. And instinct speaks its own language. There is a vocabulary to unspoken regret made up of three core dialects: patterns, projections, and protective stories. 1. Patterns. The loops you don't notice. When a regret goes unprocessed, it becomes a loop, a repetition. The mind tries to recreate the moment that broke you, not because it enjoys the pain, but because it is trying to finish a story that never ended. That's why people who regret being passive become hyper-aggressive later. Why the one who stayed silent becomes brutally honest. Why the person who abandoned their dreams becomes obsessed with success, even when it feels empty. Your present decisions are often the shadow of unfinished decisions from the past. You think you're reacting to today, but your nervous system is reacting to a memory. The opportunity that scares you today is shaped by the opportunity you walked away from years ago. The fear wasn't born in this moment. It's just echoing. Patterns are regret's way of saying, you didn't learn what this moment came to teach you. So it gives you the lesson again, disguised as coincidence. 2. Projections, the feelings you assign to others. Unspoken regret is heavy, and the mind will try to lighten the load by placing pieces of it outside itself. That's how projection works. You look at someone and see your own hidden feelings reflected back at you. You tell yourself, they think I'm not good enough. But really, you still believe that about yourself. You say, they will leave me. But you are the one who abandoned your own needs long before anyone else had the chance. Projection is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. It is easier to believe the world is punishing you than to admit you are punishing yourself. The mind externalizes the regret so you don't have to face the truth that it is still alive inside you. When you ignore regret, you start to see threats everywhere. Not because danger exists, but because your unfinished story is begging for a resolution. You don't fear others leaving. You fear facing the moment you left yourself. 3. Protective stories. The narratives you swear are true. Every regret builds a story around it to justify its silence. These are the stories you tell yourself in order to stay comfortable with the past you haven't healed. It wasn't meant to be. I didn't care that much. I'm better off now. The timing wasn't right. Some of these might be partially true, but truth without honesty is just a shield. Protective stories help you survive the first wave of regret, but over time they become bars on a cage. You repeat them so many times you forget they were born from pain, not clarity. You start to defend a version of your past that isn't fully real, and in doing so, you sacrifice possibilities in your present. A protective story is a compromise, a way to live with regret without confronting it. But compromise is not healing, it's endurance. And endurance without growth keeps you stuck in the same emotional climate, no matter how much your external life changes. The language beneath words. If you truly want to understand your regrets, you can't just ask yourself what you regret. You must observe how your regret shapes your identity, your preferences, your fears, your habits, your emotional triggers, your relationships, your dreams, your limitations. All of these are messages. The unspoken language of regret can sound like ambition, but driven by insecurity. It can look like discipline, but fueled by shame. It can look like confidence, but built on fragile self-worth. Regret is not always sad. Sometimes it wears the costume of success. The real question is not, what do I regret? It is, what part of me is trying to speak through everything I do? Because the most profound regret is not about a decision. It's about a self, the self you silenced, the self you edited, the self you misplaced trying to be acceptable, safe, praised, loved in mob, and admired, validated. Ignoring the regret doesn't erase the past. It erases parts of you. You understand your regret not when you remember the moment that created it, but when you recognize the patterns that grew around it. Every regret has an origin story. It rarely begins in adulthood, where consequences feel louder and choices look bigger. It begins quietly, in childhood, long before you knew what regret was, before you understood decisions, before you learned how to name disappointment. Childhood is where the blueprint is drawn, the map that determines which emotions you let yourself feel, which desires you suppress, which dreams you abandon, and which versions of yourself you learn to hide. Parents don't teach you regret directly. They teach you something more powerful, what it costs to be yourself. You learn this not through lectures, but through the silent rules of the household. You learn it through the reactions to your emotions, the approval or disapproval of your attempts, the way love was given or withheld when you showed your real nature. A child who is encouraged to explore grows up believing mistakes are part of discovery. A child who is punished for curiosity grows up thinking mistakes are proof of weakness. That belief becomes the seed of regret. How the story begins. Children don't have complex thoughts about failure. They have simple interpretations. Something is wrong with me. Not I made a mistake, but I am the mistake. So they adjust. Not because they want to, but because they have to. Childhood is the training ground for survival. A child's mind will do anything to protect connection, even if it means sacrificing authenticity. They will silence their voice to prevent rejection. They will minimize their emotions to avoid shame. They will shrink their dreams if dreaming makes them feel selfish. This is how regret is born before it even has a name, when the child learns there is a cost to wanting. The family lessons you never questioned. Every family teaches in its own language. Some teach that silence is strength. Some teach that achievements equal love. Some teach that emotions are dramatic. Some teach that vulnerability is weakness. Some teach that failure is humiliation. Some teach that sacrifice proves loyalty. You grow up thinking these rules are universal truths, not family beliefs. And by the time you're old enough to question them, the blueprint is already complete. So when you face choices in adulthood, you don't choose freely. You choose according to the map drawn years before you were conscious of making decisions. You don't speak your truth because you remember how expression led to punishment. You don't pursue your passion because you remember how dreaming made you feel foolish. You don't ask for what you need because dependency was treated as a burden. And then one day you look at your life and feel a subtle emptiness, a quiet ache, a regret that doesn't point to a moment, but to a lifetime of choices shaped by beliefs you never created. The childhood versions of regret. Regret in childhood is disguised as compliance. When a child swallows their desire, it doesn't disappear. It becomes a promise they never got to fulfill, a version of themselves that stayed unexpressed. Kids don't have the vocabulary to say, I wish I could be myself. They show it through longing, imagination, anger, rebellion, withdrawal. Those expressions are not misbehavior. They are the soul resisting the blueprint. But most adults don't see it. They correct the behavior instead of listening to the message. And the child learns the most dangerous lesson. Your truth creates conflict, and conflict threatens connection. So they choose connection, even if it means abandoning themselves. Years later, that choice becomes regret. Not the regret of a single decision, but the regret of a self that never got the chance to grow. The cost of being perfect. Childhood teaches two types of regret: regret of action and regret of silence. Regret of action is obvious, the time you acted impulsively and faced consequences. But regret of silence is invisible, the times you wanted something deeply but stayed quiet, the opportunities you saw but told yourself you weren't ready, the moments you wished for love but didn't ask. Silence-based regret is the most powerful because it changes identity. You don't think, I didn't try. You think, I couldn't do it because something was wrong with me. This is how a child becomes an adult who apologizes for existing, who negotiates with their desires, who doubts their place in the world. This is how a childhood belief becomes a lifetime of hesitation that looks like humility on the outside, but feels like regret on the inside. The blueprint isn't destiny. The blueprint explains your regret, but it doesn't have to define your future. Understanding where your patterns were born is not about blaming the past. It's about reclaiming the power you gave away before you even knew you had any. The truth is simple. You learned regret before you learned choice. So now, adulthood is your chance to relearn choice before you accumulate more regret. There is a moment in every life when survival becomes identity. At first, the things you do to protect yourself feel temporary. Holding back your truth, staying quiet, shrinking your dreams, choosing safety over risk. You tell yourself it's just for now, just until things get better, until you're stronger, until you feel ready. But for now has a way of becoming forever. Survival habits are meant to be temporary, yet they often become your personality. You don't even notice the shift. One day you're guarding yourself, and years later you realize you no longer know who you are without the guard. That transformation begins in childhood. A child learns quickly that being fully themselves can create consequences they don't understand. So they adapt. They numb a feeling here, silence a need there, abandon an instinct that once felt natural. Little compromises, small sacrifices, each one a survival decision. By adulthood, the original danger is gone, but the habits remain. This is the tragedy of unspoken regret. The moment that shaped you is long over, but its logic is still running your life. Survival is the first language of the heart. Survival is instinctual. It doesn't ask permission from your dreams. It doesn't check your values. It doesn't care about your future potential. It only asks one question: what do I need to do right now to stay safe? And a child answers that question with whatever tools they have. Silence can feel safe. Obedience can feel safe. Self-criticism can feel safe. Perfection can feel safe. When a child learns that their emotions make people uncomfortable, they disconnect from them. When they learn that achievement earns affection, they chase success. When they learn that vulnerability invites judgment, they train themselves to feel nothing. These decisions are intelligent in the moment. They protect the fragile self. But over time, what once protected you begins to limit you. Survival builds walls. Self-awareness builds doors. When survival outlives its purpose. Here's the paradox. You grow, but your patterns don't. The circumstances that created your fears have changed, but your nervous system is still reacting as if you're small and powerless. So you say no to opportunities you're capable of handling. You defend beliefs that were never truly yours. You live by rules no one is enforcing anymore. Your mind is using the map of an old battlefield to walk through a peaceful landscape. That's why people feel confused by their own hesitation. From the outside, their life looks stable. Inside, every decision feels heavy. They can't explain why they sabotage what they want, why they play small, why they settle. Their regret comes from choices that don't make sense in the present. They make sense in the past. Self-awareness, the language you learn. Self-awareness is not natural. It is learned. It requires something survival never asks for. Reflection. Survival reacts. Awareness observes. Survival protects. Awareness asks questions. Survival is immediate. Awareness is honest. When you finally pause long enough to hear your thoughts, you meet a stranger, yourself without the fear. You begin to realize you stayed silent once because you feared rejection. You avoided love because love once felt dangerous. You held back dreams because dreaming once ended in shame. None of these decisions are irrational. They are logical responses to a world you outgrew. But regret grows in the space between who you are now and the child you once were. The moment the echo gets loud, there is a point when survival strategies stop working. Not because the world becomes safer, but because your soul becomes louder. The echo of regret rises when you notice that the life you built to protect yourself is not the life that fulfills you. It often happens at emotional milestones. A heartbreak that removes your disguise, a failure that cracks the illusion of control, a loss that exposes what truly matters, an opportunity that terrifies and excites you at the same time. These moments reveal the difference between what you want and what you've allowed yourself to desire. Regret doesn't come to hurt you, it comes to wake you. When survival becomes the enemy of growth, the habits that once saved you become the barriers that keep you stuck. You hesitate, not because the world is dangerous now, but because the child in you still remembers when it was. You avoid risks, not because you lack ability, but because taking risks once meant losing love. You apologize for existing, defend your limitations, and believe your own protective stories, not because they're true, but because they kept you alive once. This is where self-awareness matters. It gives you the power to separate past logic from present reality. Regret is not always a memory. Sometimes it is a habit wearing the mask of personality. The most powerful regrets don't live in your thoughts. They live in the behavior you repeat without knowing why. You don't feel them as sadness. You feel them as patterns you can't escape. People think regret is obvious. A clear moment of, I wish I didn't. But the deeper truth is this: regret often shows itself through what you do, not what you recall. You forget the past consciously, but your body remembers it through choices. The pattern becomes the person. When you avoid relationships, it feels like preference. When you chase perfection, it feels like ambition. When you overwork, it feels like dedication. When you isolate, it feels like independence. When you settle, it feels like realism. But behavior asks a deeper question. Are you choosing this or repeating it? A pattern is not a decision. It is an echo disguised as logic. The regret you never faced becomes the reason behind the things you swear are simply how you are. Most people don't understand that many of their strongest traits are actually defense mechanisms polished over time. Confidence built on the fear of looking weak. Productivity built on the fear of feeling useless. Generosity built on the fear of being unwanted. Loyalty built on the fear of abandonment. We admire these qualities, but we never ask what shaped them. The truth is simple. Some of the habits that make you admirable, they're rooted in the moments that made you afraid. The behaviors that reveal regret. Regret speaks through behaviors that feel automatic, especially the ones that limit you. Overthinking. Not because you want control, because once losing control cost you something you never healed from. Anger, not because you love conflict, but because silence once made you invisible. Perfectionism, not because you value excellence, but because failure used to feel like humiliation. People-pleasing, not because you are selfless, but because love used to feel conditional. Avoidance, not because you don't want connection, but because closeness once hurt more than distance. These behaviors are not random. They are coded messages from the past, repeating themselves through your present life. Self-sabotage, the logic of old pain. Self-sabotage is not irrational. It is the mind choosing discomfort that feels predictable over possibility that feels dangerous. To the unhealed mind, success feels threatening, love feels risky, visibility feels unsafe. Happiness feels temporary. Trust feels like loss waiting to happen. So instead of reaching forward, the mind reaches backward, toward what it knows, even if what it knows is pain. People think they are afraid of failure, but deeper than that, they are afraid of changing the story they've believed for years. Because if you succeed, then the regret of not trying earlier becomes undeniable. The mirror of repetition. Every time you face a situation that resembles the past, your behavior reveals your unfinished story. You don't avoid opportunities because they're wrong. You avoid them because they remind you of a time you weren't enough. The mind doesn't fight ghosts. It fights memories of versions of you that never recovered. That's why certain relationships feel familiar without explanation. Why certain choices feel heavy. Why certain dreams feel unrealistic. You are not reacting to today. You are reacting to yesterday being echoed through today's circumstances. Emotional logic versus rational logic. You can explain your choices with rational logic. Money, timing, practicality, responsibility. But beneath the explanation is emotional logic, the kind that formed when you were young and defenseless. I don't want to try because trying once hurt me. This is where regret hides, not in the facts of the past, but in the beliefs you built from it. Recognizing the voice to understand your regret, don't ask, what happened to me? Ask, what story did I start repeating after it happened? Your behaviors are the ending of a sentence that began long ago. The adult you finish is what the child you started. The pattern continues not because the moment matters now, but because you never changed the meaning of that moment. Behavior is the language of regret. When you ignore regret, it finds another way to reach you, through the decisions you can't fully explain. Your life becomes a message written in actions instead of words. That's why transformation requires honesty. You must look at your personality and separate what is truly you from what was built to protect you. Because the day you stop repeating is the day you start choosing. And once you learn to listen to behavior the way you listen to memory, you'll discover that the loudest regrets are the ones you never thought were regrets at all. Some regrets never reach your mind. They settle directly into your body. While your thoughts move on, your nervous system stays in the moment that hurt you. Years can pass, people can change, opportunities can come and go, but your body remembers everything you tried to forget. This is why you can talk about your past like it's distant, yet feel tension in your chest when someone asks the right question. It's why certain places make you uneasy without explanation, why certain tones trigger anger, why certain kinds of closeness make you want to run. Your mind deletes what your body is still carrying. Regret is not just a memory, it's stored emotion that never completed its cycle. The science of holding on emotion is a physical process. It isn't just a feeling, it's a chemical event. When something painful happens, the body prepares for survival. Heart rate rises, muscles tighten, breathing changes. If the feeling is expressed, the process finishes. If it isn't expressed, the energy stays trapped. As a child, you didn't have the language to express regret, so you held it in your body. You swallowed apologies you never got to say. You hid dreams you never got to chase. You controlled tears because someone taught you that tears were weakness. Those unfinished emotions didn't disappear. They crystallized into patterns, tight shoulders that carried a responsibility you never voiced, a jaw that clenches every time you stay silent, a stomach that knots when you disappoint yourself, a heart that races at the thought of vulnerability. Your body tells the truth long before your mind is ready to. When the body speaks for you, ignored regret finds pathways into physical life. The symptoms are subtle at first: fatigue without a clear cause, chronic tension, shallow breathing, a restless mind at night, a feeling of heaviness upon waking. Many people think this is just adulthood, but it's often childhood emotions asking to be released. When you live with unspoken regret, the body develops coping behaviors, burnout, not because you work too much, but because achievement is how you distract yourself from the feeling of wishing you were someone else. Insomnia, not because you're wired, but because silence at night removes the distraction of daytime performances. Anxiety, not because the future is dangerous, but because a part of you remembers a past moment where you weren't safe emotionally. Shallow breathing, because inhaling fully would mean feeling fully. The body is not failing. Oh, I ain't. Oh, I'm money, I am inhaling. It is communicating. The myth of moving on. People say just move on, but moving on requires release, and release requires acknowledgement. You can't move forward by pretending the past is irrelevant. Time alone doesn't heal. Processing does. This is why someone can build a new life, succeed, love, travel, grow, and still feel a sudden wave of sadness when something touches the original wound. The body doesn't measure time the way the mind does. It only measures resolution. If the story wasn't completed, the emotion remains active. Somatic memories. Sometimes your mind remembers nothing, but your body remembers everything. This is why healing often happens physically before it happens intellectually. A deep breath opens a memory. A stretch releases sadness. A tear appears without a clear thought attached. The body frees what the mind buried. We underestimate the intelligence of the body. It isn't just a vessel, it's the archive of your life. The cost of numbness. When regret is too heavy to feel, the body adapts by numbing itself. You stop feeling deeply, not just the pain, but also the joy. Numbness is selective at first, but eventually it becomes global. You lose excitement, curiosity, passion. The body shuts down emotional access to protect you from regret, but the price is a life without intensity. You stop dreaming to stop grieving. You stop caring to stop hurting. You stop trying to avoid failing. Numbness looks calm, even controlled, but it is a quiet collapse, listening without fear. To heal, you don't have to relive every detail. You only need to listen to the signal behind the symptom. Where does your body tighten? Where do you feel warmth? Where do you feel fear? These are questions that reveal what your mind has muted. Your body speaks in sensation, not sentences. It doesn't tell you the story, it tells you where the story lives. When the body finally releases, the moment you face regret honestly, something profound happens. The body softens, the shoulders drop, breathing deepens, the heartbeat steadies, not because the past changed, but because the meaning did. Acknowledgement completes what suppression trapped. The pain loses its urgency, the story loses its edge. The body returns from survival into presence. Regret stops living in your muscles and becomes what it was always meant to be. A lesson, not a prison. There comes a moment in every life when the things you buried don't stay buried. Regret is patient, but it is not silent forever. It waits for milestones, endings, losses, failures, or quiet nights when the noise of your life isn't loud enough to drown it out. That moment is rarely dramatic. In fact, it often arrives in a whisper. It can come when you stand at a crossroads you have seen before and realize you're about to repeat a pattern you swore you'd escape. It can come when you hold your child and suddenly feel the weight of everything you never healed. It can come when a relationship ends, not because of who the other person was, but because of who you were unable to be. Sometimes regret wakes up when life slows down. A birth, a funeral, a birthday with too many candles, a quiet evening after years of running on autopilot, a doctor's appointment that forces a pause, a message from someone you once loved. Whatever form it takes, the message is the same. You can't outrun yourself. Until that moment, it was easy to blame circumstance, timing, bad luck, or other people. The story made sense. Life did this to you. Your parents shaped you. Love hurt you. Work drained you. Time betrayed you. But now the story begins to fall apart because the pattern follows you, not the world. For many, this realization is terrifying. Not because regret is painful, but because regret requires responsibility. It forces you to see that every unspoken truth, every avoided decision, every silence, and every maybe later was a choice. It wasn't the world closing doors. It was you not walking through them. And that is where the discomfort begins. You start to ask dangerous questions. Why did I abandon myself? What was I trying to protect? How long have I lived from fear instead of desire? The mind resists these questions. It tries to distract you, work harder, scroll longer, numb faster, because once regret speaks clearly, you can't go back to pretending you didn't hear it. For some, the moment arrives through loss. Losing someone you love makes you see time differently. The thought that you could have said more, tried harder, forgiven earlier, or simply been more present becomes like a shadow behind every memory. Loss doesn't create regret, it reveals it. For others, the awakening is triggered by success. Achievement is supposed to feel satisfying, but sometimes reaching the dream shows you it wasn't your dream at all. You realize you built your life on expectations, not authenticity. That realization is a quiet crisis. You have everything you thought you wanted and still feel empty. There is another kind of moment too, when you see someone else doing what you always wanted to do, living with courage you never dared to claim. You don't hate them. You envy the part of yourself they remind you of, the version that might have existed if you didn't hold yourself back. The moment regret demands to be heard is not punishment. It is an invitation, a doorway into self-awareness. It's your life saying, if you don't let the past teach you, it will control you. And here is the paradox. The moment you finally face regret is the moment it begins to lose power. You stop being haunted by what you didn't choose and start discovering what you still can. The past doesn't disappear, but it becomes material for growth instead of a cage made of memory. This moment doesn't require dramatic action. It begins with honesty, not with the world, but with yourself. You don't need to confess to anyone. You don't need to rewrite the entire story in one night. You need only to whisper one truth you've been afraid to say: I deserved more than silence. Because regret isn't there to shame you. It's there to show you the path you abandoned, the boundaries you never set, the dreams you buried under fear. It's there to remind you that the story is not finished. When regret finally speaks, you have a choice: to numb yourself again or to listen and let it become your teacher. That choice is the beginning of a new life. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. And honesty is where transformation begins. The world has a name for dramatic breakdowns, public failures, and emotional storms. But the truth is, most collapses don't look like chaos. They look like silence. A person doesn't explode. They fade. The silent collapse usually begins with small withdrawals. You stop arguing because you've already given up inside. You stop dreaming because dreams feel childish. You stop reaching for others because the risk doesn't seem worth it. You stop trusting your voice because it's easier to let life decide for you. Regret becomes a quiet gravity pulling you inward, convincing you that the safest place is away from possibility. People often mistake this collapse for maturity. You seem calm, unbothered. You don't react much. You don't get excited often. You don't ask for anything that could disappoint you. On the surface, this looks like strength. Inside, it's a room with no doors. Ignoring regret doesn't erase it. It buries it in your identity. What once was a single moment becomes a belief. I missed my chance. I don't deserve more. I'm not the person who gets to be happy. These thoughts are subtle, but they dictate everything. Instead of chasing what you want, you protect yourself from wanting anything at all. A silent collapse is not a meltdown. It's the gradual erasure of desire. You become a master of detachment. When opportunities appear, you doubt them. When love arrives, you question it. When someone believes in you, you feel suspicious instead of empowered. It is safer to stay numb than to wake up the part of you that remembers what it's like to hope. This collapse shows up in routines that look normal. You work, you scroll, you sleep, you repeat. You avoid deep conversations, not because you don't care, but because you care too much and you don't know how to show it anymore. Silence becomes your language. Not speaking is easier than explaining. Not feeling is easier than risking. Not trying is easier than failing. People around you might call it peace. They don't see the war inside, the constant negotiation between the person you are and the person you never became. The most common symptom of the silent collapse is a phrase you whisper to yourself without noticing. What's the point? Not with bitterness, but with exhaustion. This collapse also creates a strange relationship with time. You feel both too old to change and too young to give up. You're stuck between a past you can't accept and a future you don't believe in. So you shrink your world to something you can manage. The disappointment becomes familiar. Familiar feels safe. Safe becomes the only goal. But here is what most people don't realize. Regret doesn't want you to collapse. It wants to wake you up. The collapse is not the final chapter. It is the alarm. You collapse because the gap between your potential and your reality becomes too painful to ignore. And because you've spent years telling yourself you shouldn't want more, you run out of emotional energy to pretend. You're not weak. You're tired of carrying the weight of silence. The collapse is the moment your inner world stops cooperating with the life you built around fear. It is the body saying, I can't keep living like this. Ironically, the collapse often looks like nothing at all. You go quiet. You stare at a wall longer than usual. You feel heavy in moments that used to feel light. You realize you haven't laughed in a long time. Not because there was no humor, but because your joy has been sleeping. The collapse is not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough that hasn't found its voice yet. Because once everything goes quiet, something else becomes impossible to avoid. The question of who you could still become. In the silence, you hear echoes of the self you abandoned. Not to shame you, but to remind you that possibility is still alive underneath the numbness. The collapse is the turning point where comfort becomes unbearable and discomfort becomes the doorway to honesty. This is where transformation begins, not with loud ambition, but with a whisper too persistent to ignore. There has to be more than this. And there is. But you can't reach it while pretending you don't want it. The silent collapse is not the end of your story. It is the moment the story demands a different author, the version of you that is tired of disappearing. Regret may feel like a memory, but it's actually a message. It speaks in patterns, behaviors, discomfort, and repetition. Sometimes you don't remember the moment that shaped you, but you live the consequences every day. To decode regret, you don't need to dig endlessly into the past. You need to learn how to listen differently. Regret doesn't speak in clear sentences. It speaks in symptoms. You can hear it in the hesitation before you say yes, in the apology you offer when you express a need, in the excitement you quickly bury because dreaming feels embarrassing, in the way you accept less, not because you want less, but because you don't want to face the disappointment of wanting more. These are clues. Regret is not a wound, it's a map. To decode it, you begin with the pattern instead of the story. Ask yourself, what keeps repeating in my life? Do your relationships always end the same way? Do you always choose safety over opportunity? Do you sabotage happiness right when it becomes real? Do you work hard to prove worth you already have? Do you seek validation instead of voice? Patterns are memory without memory, proof of what your conscious mind forgot, but your emotional system never did. Step 1. Notice before you explain. You don't need the reason yet, just notice, I do this. Explanation comes later. The truth doesn't appear while defending yourself. It appears while observing without judgment. Step 2. Trace it back. Once you see the pattern, follow it to its source. When was the first time you learned this behavior? Not the dramatic moment. Often it's something small. A look on a parent's face, a rejection that felt bigger than it was. A moment when trying led to shame. A time you spoke your truth and it wasn't safe. The mind remembers impact, not logic. Step 3. The origin question. Ask yourself, what was I trying to protect? Regret is rarely born from selfishness. It's born from protection. You protected love by not asking for more. You protected belonging by shrinking yourself. You protected stability by not risking your dream. You protected your heart by pretending it didn't want anything. Once you see the protection, regret makes sense. It wasn't a failure. It was survival. Step 4, the unspoken sentence. Every deep regret has a hidden sentence beneath it. Something you never said, even to yourself. Something like, I was scared. I needed love. I didn't know how. I wanted to be chosen. I was trying to keep peace. Writing that sentence down is the beginning of healing, because regret doesn't come from the past. It comes from abandoned truth. Step 5, turn memory into meaning. Once you uncover the origin, the goal is not to judge who you were, it's to update the belief that came from that moment. Maybe the truth used to be, if I speak, I lose people. But now the truth is, if I don't speak, I lose myself. Maybe the old belief was, I don't get second chances. But now it's, every day is a second chance. Regret becomes wisdom when it changes the story you tell about yourself. This process isn't done in a single night. It happens quietly, like a muscle rebuilding. Some practical ways to decode regret. Journal the pattern. Write down situations that trigger the same reaction. Not the events, the emotion. Fear, shame, longing, defensiveness, numbness. Reveal the first time. Ask, when did I learn this response? Your mind will show you something small but meaningful. Write the unspoken truth. One sentence, simple, human. Practice the opposite. If your pattern is silence, speak one sentence. If your pattern is perfection, let something be imperfect. If your pattern is avoidance, stay in the moment 5 seconds longer. You don't heal regret by rewriting the past. You heal it by choosing differently now. Most people think regret is a prison. It isn't. It's the door you avoided. It's the unfinished chapter of your life, waiting for you to pick up the pen again. When you decode regret, you realize something powerful. You were never afraid of the past. You were afraid of reclaiming your future. And the moment you understand the language of your own silence, regret stops being a shadow and becomes a guide. Regret is not a sentence. It is a doorway. It does not exist to punish you, but to show you what has been left unfinished. For years, you may have ignored it, numbed it, or disguised it as something else. Work, perfection, avoidance, even control. But when you finally listen, regret offers a rare gift, the chance to rewrite your relationship with yourself. This is the moment every life waits for, the moment when regret stops being a chain and starts becoming a compass. From punishment to purpose, the first step in transforming regret is changing the way you see it. You must stop believing that regret is a mark of failure. It is not proof that you made mistakes beyond repair. It is proof that you have been alive enough to notice the gap between what you wanted and what you allowed. That awareness is precious, more than you might realize. Regret becomes a teacher the moment you listen with curiosity instead of shame. It says, here is what mattered to you. Here is what you silenced. Here is where your life can expand if you are brave enough to act. When you act from that perspective, regret stops being a mirror of loss and becomes a blueprint for growth. The power of integration. To turn regret into a new identity, you must integrate the lessons it carries. This is not about erasing the past. It is about folding it into your present in a way that strengthens rather than limits you. Integration happens when you acknowledge the truth you ignored. Forgive yourself for doing what you needed to survive. Learn the lesson embedded in your choices. Apply that knowledge in how you live now. Integration transforms the unspoken regret of your past into conscious actions that align with the self you want to become. Redefining identity. Every regret carries a shadow version of yourself, one that you abandoned, ignored, or silenced. Turning regret into identity is reclaiming that version of you. The person who never spoke their truth can now start saying, I need this, or I feel this. The person who stayed silent out of fear can now claim space. The child who once believed they weren't enough can now step fully into their worth. The one who avoided dreams can now begin small, intentional steps toward them. Your regrets are not obstacles. They are reminders of what matters most. They mark the areas of your life where your courage has been dormant. Practical transformation. Transformation doesn't require dramatic gestures. It starts quietly. Speak what you avoided. Even one sentence can shatter a lifetime of silence. Act where you hesitated. Take a small risk that aligns with your truth. Forgive yourself. The person you were did what they could with the tools they had. Reframe the story. Change the narrative from punishment to learning. Practice presence. Stop reliving the past in your mind and start choosing today intentionally. Each action rewires the narrative you've carried for years. Regret stops being a weight when it becomes a guide. The courage to be whole. The final truth is this: no one transforms regret without courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to act despite fear. It is the choice to face the shadow of your former self and say, I am ready to integrate all of me, even the parts I hid. When you do, your life changes. Your decisions become intentional instead of reactive. Your relationships become authentic instead of transactional. Your emotions flow instead of being trapped. Your body relaxes into presence instead of carrying the memories it cannot release. A new story begins. Turning regret into a new identity does not erase your past. It transforms it. It takes the lessons, the missed opportunities, the silence, the fear, and channels them into wisdom. You are no longer the person who walked away from yourself. You are the person who reclaimed their life, step by step, choice by choice. Regret becomes a tool instead of a burden, a compass instead of a cage, a teacher instead of a critic. This is the ultimate alchemy of life, turning what once hurt into what now guides. And when you do, you discover the most profound truth of all. Your life is not defined by what you lost, but by what you choose to create next. The story is no longer about regret. It is about you, whole, awake, free.